Good morning, AP folks. I just want to shoot a video that talks about the European theater. Last week we talked about the Pacific. This week we're going to talk about Europe. So, as you can see from the map on my screen, it looks like a bit of a mess. Let's see if we can break this down. So obviously, the Axis countries are in the sort of lighter colored yellow. I would actually include Finland in that group, but whatever. Let's talk about those. So you know about Germany, you know about Italy, fine. Austria gets annexed by Germany. That's why it's considered one. The Sudeten, same thing. Finland. How does Finland figure into all this? Because there's no German army invading Finland. The reason is quite simply that the Finns had just been fighting a war with the Russians called the Winter War, and they'd successfully been fighting a war with the Russians, but they were looking for an ally to help them against the Russians. And the enemy of my enemy being my friend, they sided with the Axis. Okay, that's Finland. The other one you might notice is Romania. There's no German army invading Romania. Romania also sided with the Axis for similar reasons. There were a lot of countries feeling threatened by Russia. All right, we got that. So what you're seeing here is an expansion out of the sort of Germany center, right? You're seeing the expansion to France, you're seeing expansion into Poland, and eventually into the Soviet Union. You're seeing the northward invasion of Norway, and this is all happening at once. This was a pretty serious feat by Germany to pull all this off in a very short order. The mistake they made, of course, invading the Soviet Union is always a tough thing. Trying to invade Russia is difficult. The weather's against you. So had a reasonably large population, and they had miles and miles of land to soak you up. It's a very, very difficult thing. And as you can see, 4 or 5 separate invasions all stalled out roughly the same depth into the country. So that's the Eastern Front. You've got this, we talked about, Poland and Hungary, all that to getting into the Soviet Union. The Western Front only really gets through the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Let's talk about why. So, one, Spain had been something of an ally to Germany before, but had decided to stay neutral in the war. They're out, so Germany's not invading there. Portugal just stays neutral. And that leaves, once you get through France, what do you got? You've got Great Britain. The problem with invading Great Britain, and the Germans didn't intend to, is that you've got water in between the English Channel, and the English Navy, the British Navy is very, very strong. So the Germans had to find a way to force a crossing. They tried heavy air attacks. It's called the Blitz. They tried, to use submarine warfare to starve out the island. They tried any number of things to try this. They never did come up with a solution to the problem. The British Navy was still strong enough that it was always going to be a tough thing. It is possible Germany could have pulled it off, but realistically, that was very, very difficult. That was a big ask. So Britain took horrible casualties during the Blitz. London was decimated. But the Germans were never able to develop a serious threat to cross the Channel. And this is where the Western Front stalls out. There's nowhere else to go. Down south on the map, you'll notice that the Germans and Italians controlled North Africa with the exception of Egypt being a British colony at the time. That is going to be the first place where the Allies counterattack. So the first part of the war, from the mid-30s all the way up through 41, is largely the Germans pushing people out of the way, really having their own way. After this, you start to see a change. First things first, they run into, again, the English Channel, and the British are able to sort of keep them out of Britain. That's thing one. Two, Russian resistance gets stronger and stronger through the early 40s. The Russians actually pulled their industry and rebuilt it back behind the Ural Mountains in Asia. That gave them the ability to produce stuff that the Germans couldn't hit with planes. They also managed to turn cities like Stalingrad and Leningrad into, just trash waste dumps for German troops. They would kill a lot of German troops trying to take those cities. You had Russian snipers, you had Russian soldiers fighting house to house to house, and it turned into a nightmare for German troops. The Russians managed to stop them short of Moscow. You're starting to see this contained. So when the U.S. enters the war in 41, which remember, there was no guarantee the U.S. was going to enter the war in Europe until Germany, the day after Pearl Harbor, decides to declare war on the United States. Probably not their wisest decision in the world. Remember, the U.S. had been selling arms to Britain and the Soviets and all that for a couple of years at this point. So we were influencing this conflict, but not directly involved. All right. So the first place we get involved, other than sending supplies, is to send troops into North Africa. Why attack North Africa? All right. Churchill called North Africa and Italy the soft underbelly of the Axis, and he was probably right. What does Britain have going for it here? What does the Americans have going for it here? One, you've got an easy invasion route right along the side. Where's my little tool here? I have a highlight clicks. There we go. Oh, come on, highlight clicks. There we go. Okay. So one, if you look at North Africa, right here, you've got Egypt. Egypt is a British colony, is a British base. It's a fairly big one, and you can get supplies through there. You've also got the Suez Canal, which is a major important piece. Britain didn't want to lose that. Nobody wanted the Allies to lose that. That would be a serious problem. Because as long as they control the Suez, the Brits can get supplies in through the Red Sea into Egypt. All right, so that's one reason. The other reason is if you look over here, the U.S. has a very easy invasion route. Landing in this part of Africa gives them, an easy straight access. There's no big access base there to deal with, so they can land there. So the first invasion, and the U.S. makes a lot of mistakes on this invasion. This is where we learned how to do this. We come in through North Africa. The British are pushing in from Egypt, and we meet up here in Tunisia. Are these territories super valuable? No, they're not. There's not a lot there that's going to be crucial, but it's a start, and it also gives us an easy jump-off point to invade Sicily and Italy. All right, why invade Sicily and Italy? Keep in mind that Germany didn't really feed itself. So if you can take Italy away from it, that's going to cause a lot of problems. That's going to make it more difficult. This was, again, World War I. One of the things Germany couldn't do was get food, and part of that was because Italy backed out of the war right at the beginning. So you have, through 43, you have U.S. and British and other troops coming up here through Italy. All right, why not just continue on through Italy and go through here? Well, right here you have the Alps. A chunk of it you can't go through because Switzerland has declared its neutrality and nobody wants to fight the Swiss. And the other part of it, Austria, is held by Germany and is very well defended. If they can concentrate their forces there, you're not going to get through. So you have this push. They threw a push through southern, what was called Vichy France. Remember, about half of France just was its own country and part of the Axis powers. This invasion kind of spiked off of this one and it came through here. By 1942, Stalin, Russia, Soviet Union, is absolutely screaming for another front. The reason is really obvious if you look at this. Who's taking the biggest losses in this war? It's no question the Soviet Union. U.S. losses are tiny by comparison. British losses really are tiny by comparison. You look at Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, Poland are where these losses are happening. This is where the real butchery of the war is happening. So it's no real shock that Stalin and the Soviets really do want another front opened up. This is the famous D-Day. When you see American troops massed in Great Britain, British troops, Free French troops, Canadian troops, you name it, an allied nation, they probably hit some troops there. And they crossed the channel and invaded Normandy right here. You'll notice they didn't cross at the closest point. I mean, the closest point is 22 miles right there. They crossed a much wider part. Part of this reason for this is that they had set up an inflatable army here, literally a bunch of inflatable tanks. And General Patton, who was expected by the Germans to run at least part of the invasion army, they put them right here to make it look like they were going to cross over here, when in fact the army crossed here. It drew some defenses this way. It made D-Day less bloody than it could have been. D-Day was an incredibly bloody invasion. So what you'll notice is the invading armies quickly swing out to the coast here. Again, they want to secure the ports here. This is a French city called Brest. They want to get that freed up so they can move troops and supplies in. And then they start to move through Belgium and into Germany. This is tough. You'll notice this little battle here, the Battle of the Bulge. That was a major German counteroffensive that very nearly broke the Allied lines. I'm not sure it would have changed the end of the war, but it could have prolonged the war by several years. So now you've got American, British, Dutch, everybody's forces coming in this way. You've got Russian forces swarming this way after the losses. The Germans couldn't sustain the losses they were getting in Stalingrad and Leningrad. The Germans had to retreat, and they couldn't throw more resources at the Soviet Union because now they had to fight the Allies over here. And you had this Italian front that was, while not making a lot of progress, putting pressure on the Alps, forcing the Germans to keep troops there. So you've got three avenues of attack. You've got this one, you've got this one, and you've got this one. Without all three, Germany might be able to hold off and have a negotiated solution. With all three, the chances of Germany surviving this as a intact nation are very, very minimal. The other thing that's going on that's not really shown on this map is the fact that British and American bombers are flying out of England and just hammering German targets constantly. This is one of the sad parts of World War II, is that we didn't have a lot of precision weaponry at the time. We had dumb bombs. We had, explosives in a metal case that you drop out of a plane. We had a decent bomb sight, but still, it's not the sort of thing that's going to pick out military targets with ease. So what we tended to do on both sides was to go after cities. We tended to find a population center and beat the ever-living hell out of it. With both regular bombs and incendiaries, which are even nastier. This happened in Japan. This happened in Germany. The Germans did it to the Brits. The Germans did it to Soviet cities. This was how wars were fought at the time. We don't do it anymore. It's called carpet bombing. But you basically fly over the city and just drop as many bombs as you can on it. Now, as you guess, this tends to kill more civilians than soldiers, but the intent is to slow down economic production. If you remember the Civil War, Sherman and Sheridan's march through Georgia and the Shenandoah Valley was meant to gut the South's food production. This is sort of the same thing. The idea here is to gut German military production. And in fact, they would go after cities that had particular parts. Ball bearings were one of the things they targeted, because you need ball bearings in any mechanized equipment. So if you destroy their ability to produce them, then you're going to slow up the war effort. Germany didn't have a native source of oil, so they actually used a complex and expensive process to turn coal into oil. And if you hit those, that was going to slow it up. It's part of why the Germans started abandoning their tanks later in the war. They didn't have the fuel to put in them. So this gives you just a general sense of how things went. Obviously, there's way more detail in this, but this is just my big picture viewpoint. So if you have any questions, please text me, email me, whatever. Please stay safe. And that's that. Thank you very much.